So we're going to be starting the second part of chapter 18, section 3, notes. We're talking about Napoleon, right? We started on him the other day about his leadership style, right? The three things that are included in that. What are the three things that made him a great leader? What are they? Go.
Energy.
Energy. Go. Charm. Intelligence. Three big things, right? Remember we talked about if you got those three things and you got them in spades, or you have them, in abundance, you're probably going to be a pretty good leader. It might not mean that you lead people to the right things, right? But you're probably going to be good at leading, right? You're going to get people to follow you. That's probably the better way to say that. You'll probably have a lot of people follow you. Hopefully, you use those skills to get people to follow you down the right path, right? But we've seen over time, throughout history, a lot of people with those skill sets end up using them for the wrong things, right? So we're at that point. We have seen Napoleon now crown himself emperor, Napoleon the First. So he's got a little bit of an ego, right? We've seen himself, he crowned himself that. Nobody was like, hey, we should make you emperor. He was like, I'm emperor. So we see that ego shining through, all right? We're going to talk about Napoleon's domestic policies now. So when we talk about domestic policies, that means at-home policies, meaning within France. How he's going to run France. Remember, if you're the emperor, you have to do what? You got to run the country, right? You're in charge. You got to be able to dictate what's happening. And so we see, I'll start kind of going and telling you what to underline and highlight. One of Napoleon's first acts at home was to establish peace with the oldest enemy of the revolution, which was the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church didn't like the revolution. The revolution was ripping apart the Catholic Church, if you remember that. Remember, they de-Christianized things. They changed names of roads. They took saint out of things. They actually held a weird service to the God of Reason, in essence, right in the main cathedral of Notre Dame. So they really, as they were revolting, were trying to tear down all real established things within France. All right, if we draw kind of a comparison to the United States, over the past couple of years, mainly the past year, have we seen people trying to tear down major established things in the United States? What do you think? I'm not asking if you agree with it or not. I'm saying, have we seen it? I see a couple of nods and right? How about, would you say that public education is a major established thing in the United States? Yeah, probably. Over the past year, you've heard a lot of negative things towards public education. Right or wrong, that's not what I'm arguing. What I'm saying is that you've seen people try to come after it. That's awful. It's this, it's that. You've also seen the other. It's great. We did it. So you're always going to get the gamut. How about statues being torn down of founding fathers of the United States? Right? Would you say that founding fathers of a country are kind of a pillar of that country? Yes. Does that mean that they always were great people? No, right? But they are an established pillar of a country. So when a revolution is starting, you start to see what? People going after established pillars. If you can knock out pillars of an established thing, what happens to the building? Right? You ever seen a hurricane blow through a beach town? Right? And a lot of those things are built on pillars. What happens when the ocean keeps hitting those pillars? Eventually, one pillar falls, and you start to see the house do what, or the building do what? Right? And then eventually it's going to collapse. Right? And again, I'm not asking if you agree or disagree with some of the things that they've been attacking in America, but people who are against a lot of what's going on in America today are attacking a couple decades, centuries of what? Pillars throughout our country, right? Go after statues and changing names of schools because of Abraham Lincoln. Think about that. Abraham Lincoln's known as one of the greatest presidents of our country, one of the greatest men in all of history. When you start taking names of that president off of school buildings because whatever your reason is, what is that? What might be the next step? Right? If Abraham Lincoln wasn't good, I don't know how good I am. That's kind of that next argument, right? That's down that path of destruction. So we see the Catholic Church was being torn apart. They hated the revolution because of that. We see Napoleon think he's a smart guy, remember. I got to get them back on my side. You see how that works? So he goes to the Catholic Church. Let's see what he does. Napoleon himself had no personal religious faith, so he didn't care necessarily about being religious, but he saw the need to restore stability in France. Religion adds stability. Do we understand that? Why did people first come to this land back in the day?
So they didn't have to be persecuted if they didn't believe.
Exactly, or so that they could believe whatever they wanted and practice that belief. Why? Because religion gives stability to people. Again, did I ask you, do you agree with or disagree with religion? No. I don't care. Your religion can be anything or nothing in this country. But for a large group of people in this country, there is zero argument to this statement. Religion is a balance for them, right? Is a stabilizing factor in their lives. Catholic Church is huge. The Christian faith is huge. The Muslim faith is huge. Do you see what I'm saying? So if you attack that and get rid of it, what might happen to a large group of people? They might lose their stable ground. And what eventually happens then? Collapses. So that's why he looked at the Catholic Church and said, we've got to kind of get France back to having some stability. We're going to make friends with them again. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. So what does he do? Napoleon makes an agreement with the Pope. Pretty smart. The Pope's in charge of the Catholic Church. Goes to the Pope, says, let's make an agreement. Makes sense. What does this agreement do? The agreement recognized Catholicism as the religion of the majority of the French people. We're going to laugh about that in a second, but in return, the Pope agreed not to ask for the return of church lands that were seized in the Revolution. This agreement was popular with both the Catholics and with the people who had bought church lands during the Revolution. So let's look at this agreement. Did he give the Catholic Church anything? Did he? I heard one person answer that. Do we think he gave the Catholic Church anything? Really? No. Hey, Pope. That'd be weird to just call the guy Pope, but hey, Pope, here's what I'm going to do for you. Here's that charm. Here's what I'm going to do for you, Pope. We're going to say that the majority of people in France are Catholic again. What do you think? Well, if I got a lot of people, if I'm the Pope that are Catholic, that means I have a lot of power, don't I? Right, but did anybody in France say that they would be Catholic?
No.
Did anybody sign that agreement? No. Nope. That was just Napoleon whining and dining the Pope. Now, the Pope could have probably gotten some church lands back. Remember, they took lands and gave them away to people, so the church had no power. Remember, we talked about earlier in the year, land equals what? Power. Church lands were taken and sold away to people. Now, imagine if Napoleon would have gone and taken those lands and given them back to the church. What might have happened to all the people that liked Napoleon and were now rich because they had the power of land? Would they have liked Napoleon anymore? No. So it's a win-win. He goes to the Pope. He says, hey, Pope, everybody will be Catholic. Or a lot of people will be Catholic, right? Just the majority of people will be Catholic. And guess what? I'm going to keep the land. And the Pope goes, okay. It's a win-win. He has to prove nothing, and he gets to keep the land in the people's hands that already like him. And the Catholics in France that were still Catholic go, yay, we're Catholic again. You see, that's a smart guy and a very shrewd businessman or leader, if you will. All right? Sometimes leaders get over on people. I'm not saying it's good, but they get over on people sometimes. All right? So let's keep rolling. Napoleon's most famous domestic achievement, this is a big deal, was his underlined codification of the laws. Codification of the laws, which means he put all of these laws kind of in order. All right? And let's kind of look at that. Before the Revolution, France did not have a single set of laws, but almost 300 different legal systems. Do you understand how that might be a problem to deal with? If you got pulled over today for a speeding ticket in our state, we have one set of laws that dictate what will happen in that setting. Now, are there different fines and penalties for what you might have been doing? Yes, and those get a little weird to even understand those, but it's still under one set of laws, the United States laws or the New Jersey state driving laws. It's one set of laws. Do you understand? We do have federal law and state law in our country, right? But usually if you're charged with a federal crime, guess how you're tried? In a federal court. So you deal with one set of laws. You usually don't deal with both sets of laws, right? You don't deal with state and federal all at the same time because it's too hard to navigate that. Could you imagine having 300 different sets of laws? You might think in one area what you're doing is legal, and you take a step onto another area of the country and it's totally illegal. But would you know that? Probably not. How many of you know the law of this land 100%? You notice I didn't raise my hand. And I'm pretty smart when it comes to a lot of that stuff. It doesn't mean that I know it all. I'm not a lawyer. Most lawyers probably don't know all of the different laws. They have to learn them. They have to study them. If they go into a court case, they have to really practice. Like, okay, what laws do I have to hammer home on, right? I love watching court TV because some of the stuff that comes up, I'm like, that's a law in this country? Holy crap, right? Like, I would have never known that, all right? If you're at all in tune with these huge cases that are going on right now, tune into them sometimes and listen to the different things that these lawyers are debating, right? I'm sure we've heard of the case going on right now, the George Floyd case, correct? Mr. Chauvin, Officer Chauvin, right? They have brought him up on several different charges. If you don't know all the different charges and all the different laws and then you talk about it like you do, you end up looking really dumb because there are so many different things that go into all of that case. Several different things go into it. And I will honestly tell you, I've looked at it a lot, and it's very difficult to understand just that one case. Go ahead.
I think it's in Atlanta.
Yes.
Did you know that you cannot hold a ice cream cone in your back pocket on a Sunday?
That wouldn't surprise me if that's in the laws. Probably because somebody did something really stupid and somebody tripped. It wouldn't. I didn't know that, but it doesn't. But there's one random law. You see, that's just one law in one state. So Napoleon had over 300 different law systems, and he codified them into one. Do you understand? Like, he broke it all down. So for the French, it's a good thing. I'm sure if you looked up, you'd find a lot of weird laws in even New Jersey that you would never know, and you probably break them often and don't even realize it. That's being serious. You can't drive on Sundays, and and you'll be like, that was a law, and nobody ever took it off the books. All right, so they stay there. All right, so France did not have a single set of laws, almost 300. Napoleon completed 7 codes of laws. So just like we have federal and state, he created 7 codes of laws. So a little bit easier to understand. The most important of these was the underlined civil code, also called the Napoleonic Code. This code preserved most of the gains of the revolution by recognizing the principle of underlined equality of all citizens before the law, the right of the individual to choose a profession, religious toleration, and the abolition of serfdom and feudalism. Property rights were carefully protected. The rights of women were, however, curtailed. So that's interesting. Did women have a lot of rights already? No. And what they did have got a little bit more curtailed. Napoleon had this real interesting, I don't want to call it hatred, but odd feelings towards women. And he really loved his mother, so it's very strange that he really, instead of, where he's trying to keep all of these individual rights, did you notice all those individual rights I just mentioned? You can underline those. All of a sudden, we see that women's rights get lessened for some reason. It's a strange little mix. Divorce was still allowed, but it was difficult for women to get divorces. So a man could get the divorce, the woman would struggle to be able to get one. When women married, their property came under the control of their husbands, and in lawsuits, they were treated as minors. So do you see how it's this under Napoleon, it was this taking down of women even more notches. Again, it doesn't make much sense, but he did it, okay? So just so that we understand that. Napoleon worked hard to develop a bureaucracy of capable officials. Promotion, underlined, was based on ability. We've talked about that before, ability. There was a change at the middle class, or this was a change that the middle class wanted before the revolution. Remember, the middle class was upset that they could never really get out of the middle class. They were stuck. They couldn't move. We have in our country upward and downward mobility, do we not? You can be poor, you can become rich. You can likewise be rich and become poor. It happens, okay? Napoleon also created a new aristocracy based on merit, meaning you earn it, right? Merit is you earn it, you deserve it. You had to take, you could rise up in the ranks of civil and military service. Jump down to the last paragraph. Napoleon claimed that he had preserved the gains of the revolution. Underline that. In some respects, this was true, okay? So the civil code preserved what we talked about in the beginning, this equality of all citizens, opening government careers to more people. We see that. On the other hand, though, Napoleon really did destroy some of the revolution. All right? Some of those things were liberty, which means freedom, was replaced by despotism. So he became, has anybody ever heard that word before? Despotism? It's a big word, right? It means this: one ruler who rules very harshly, usually. They rule with an iron fist. What they say goes. Go ahead.
What's the difference between that and like a tyrant?
Very similar. You could use them interchangeably. You could use them interchangeably. No one would argue with you normally, right? I could be a tyrant of a teacher, though. Usually, despotism is associated with leaders of countries. Usually, does that make more sense? You could be a tyrant office manager. Like, tyrant's usually the under word, but you could probably, if you were writing a paper and use them interchangeably, I'd be surprised if anybody argued with you. So that's a good question. They were a little bit more free, supposedly. Now they have the leader who is a despot, is how you would say that, right? He also eliminated the freedom of the press. This is an interesting one. Underline this one. He hated the press. Why might a despot ruler hate the press? Go.
He might go against him.
Easy answer, right? What do you mean he might go against him? They might say things that call into question his leadership abilities. So if you're the mean ruler and you do something that the newspaper calls to the carpet, hey, we don't like that he did this, look at how bad it is, you might want to get rid of that. Why? Because if people start to think that the paper said is true, and it might be true, what might people want to do to you as the leader? Get rid of you, right? It's simple. It's not rocket science, but we see politicians throughout history have this love-hate relationship with newspapers, with the press, if you will. Okay? I've been alive a pretty long time, 44 years. I didn't start paying attention necessarily to politics too much until probably when I was around 18, 19 years old, let's say, maybe a little before that. But I never have heard more about the press than in the last 10 years. I'm going back to even maybe even a little longer than that. Right around 9/11 time. So about 10 years, 11 years, 12 years. Okay. So a lot of presidents, not just President Trump, a lot of presidents have had this real love-hate. You okay?
Yeah. Kind of cramp.
Oh, okay. Have this real love-hate relationship with the newspapers. All right. What was Donald Trump's big thing when he got into office? Well, he loved Twitter, right? Somebody should have taken his Twitter account, and people probably would view him a little differently as a president. And I mean that, whether good or bad. I think people might have viewed him a little differently. But what was his view of press? Go ahead.
Fake news.
Fake news. Fake news. Fake news. Fake news. Fake news. Fake news. Fake news. Is some of the news fake? 100%. There's no denying that. Is some of the news real? 100%. There's no denying that. But he was the first president that I'd ever really witnessed really say that. And I think that's why people both liked and hated him. Does that make sense? Usually when you're the first at anything, people are going to really like or hate you. And when you're the president, you're 50% liked, 50%. That's just the norm. But I remember a lot of the press going against President Bush back in the day. I remember a lot of the press going for President Obama back in the day. Right? For the same reasons why they would go against one president, they would go for another. Just recently, we came out in the news. Anybody ever heard of CNN? Has anybody seen what happened with CNN over the past couple days? It's very interesting. And I don't care what you guys watch or what your family watches. It doesn't matter. But one of the head directors of the news at CNN, the program director, I think is his exact title. So it's the guy who's dictating what the news is going to present on CNN. Do we understand that? Right? He decides, basically he's told from the owner and whoever, this is what we want to pursue. All right? And basically they have tapes of him openly admitting to pushing stories that weren't necessarily true, that were kind of guided at doing certain things. Now, you can believe him, right? You can say he might have been set up, right? But as somebody who's watching that, right, a consumer of said news, doesn't that make me question news a little more? Right? He openly said on tape that CNN wanted to get Donald Trump out of office. That's the head director of a news source. Think about it. I'm not telling you not to like CNN. I watch some of their shows. But that's the head director of a news source. Now, put that back in Napoleon's time. Do you think Napoleon would want to get rid of that news source if they openly are against him? What? Even if they're saying something true, he wouldn't want you to know it at that point. And what if they're lying? Uh-oh. They openly said they deliberately put videos whenever they could of President Biden jogging. Why would they do that? Does anybody know how old President Biden is?
75.
He's 78. He's the oldest president we've ever had. Now, again, nothing wrong. I don't have a problem. But why would they show videos of him jogging whenever they could? It looks good. Because most people might go, why would we vote for a guy who's almost 80 years old and he might be dying? I'm not saying he is. But if you're the news source, do you understand what I'm saying? So why might Napoleon be really against news? Because they lie or they tell the truth. And you now have to figure it out for yourselves. And it's very difficult, especially today. I feel bad for people, myself included. We have information at our fingertips 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I have to figure out if it's real or not. And no offense to you guys, you have to figure out if it's real or not. And it's pretty hard for me to figure it out. And I'm pretty smart. Not very smart, but I have a master's degree. I can think. You guys can think, but have you been kind of around the news a lot? Probably not. So when you read something on Twitter a lot of times, what do you think? It's got to be true. It's from CNN. It's from Fox News. Those are reputable sources. Well, now we have to figure it out for ourselves. Are they really good sources? How do we figure that out? So Napoleon basically said, I'll decide what you can hear and not hear. That can be very dangerous as well, can't it? Do you think Donald Trump ever wanted anything negative to come out about him? Of course not. But as an American public, should we know the negative and the positive? Of course we should. It's the dude who we're trusting with the codes to launch nuclear weapons. I would want to know if that person was able to make that decision, right? I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? I would want to know that, our president right now is capable of doing that with a sane mind. I think he is. I'm not saying he's not. But imagine if you watch Fox News and all they show is him being a bumbling idiot. That's the flip side. Do you see what I just did there? CNN showing he's healthy and he's running. The other one showing he can't get out of sentence. Are either of those 100% true? No. You have to figure out the middle ground. But in our country, we at least have that freedom still to do that. In other countries, they get rid of those things. And you only see one thing. Okay? Does that make sense? Why the newspapers are pretty important, but they also can be pretty dangerous? All right? So think for yourselves is what I'm saying. Learn for yourself. Research for yourself. You ever hear a leader say he wants to get rid of newspapers and the news? Question that leader. Do you understand what I'm saying? Does that make sense? All right? You guys think for yourselves a little bit, okay? I'm not telling you what to think. I'm telling you think for yourself, okay? So let's keep looking a little bit down. So he shut down 60 of France's 73 newspapers and required all manuscripts be approved before they were published. So he wanted to read all of it before it even got out to you. It's interesting. You know why he might want to do that now. Even the mail was opened by government police. Why would they want to open up mail? What happens with mail? Go ahead.
Because if someone's sending them something like, we're going to start a revolution, they want to know, so they
Yep.
can flush it.
Yep. Or if I'm talking to you about something that is mean against the, right? That's why when people go, I don't want one of those devices, those Amazon devices in my house, people are listening. I go, okay. Yeah, they are. I sat around my Thanksgiving table a couple of years ago, and I remember one of my family members who I love dearly. I would never put one of those in my house. And I went like this. I'm not kidding you. I picked up my phone and I went, hey, Google. Boom. And it started answering a question. I said, you have one in your pocket. You walk around with it all day. You just don't want one sitting on your counter? Like, that was an adult who has a brain. And they did, okay? So I was like, they're around all the time. People are listening. And if they care about what I have to say, get a life. I mean, you're hearing me order a pepperoni pizza at 12 at night. If the government's sitting around listening to me, they got real problems. But again, mail, texting, what you're saying on your computer. Did you ever notice that an ad pops up 30 seconds after you said something to a friend? I was looking at these Nikes the other day. Amazing, that Nike just popped up on my wife wonders why I buy so many different pairs of shoes. Well, the internet just keeps sending them to me. All right? What I'm saying is pay attention to what's going on in your world. Don't give out your information just because. Be smart. Think about what you're saying and who you're talking to, right? If you tweet something out, guess what? It's out there forever. People can find it, right? So it's good things to understand and know about your own world. And it's good things to understand when the government wants to police that. There's probably a reason why they want to police it. Does that make sense? All right? We'll talk a little bit more about the press tomorrow, maybe. I think there's a lot going on there. All right, so we'll stop there. The bell's about to ring. Nice job.